back to another episode of the Crime with Kylie podcast. Now, for today's case, I actually found out about it thanks to an Instagram comment. And I'm so grateful for that comment because this case really needs to be shared. It cannot be forgotten. As I'm sure you already saw in the title of this video, we'll be going over the case of Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Two people who were young and newly in love and should not have had their lives ripped from them in the ways that they did. And before we get into the case, I do have to warn you guys and give you guys kind of a heads up because this case is one that's even difficult for me to talk about because we will be going over topics such as rape, more specifically gang rape, torture, and graphic murder altogether. And a really difficult thing about this case is that no innocent person was watching it happen. By that I mean that the details of this case were told by the 5 people who were involved in torturing and murdering them. And as I'm sure you guys can imagine, when they're all on the stand testifying, they're telling the same story, but they're kind of shifting the blame to each other because none of them want to say, I'm solely responsible for X, Y, and Z. They want to say, oh, Eric did that part, I didn't do that. And then Eric saying, no, Davidson did that. So they're all pointing fingers at each other. I feel like I really have to share that about this case because I went through and I watched every single testimony court video on this case that's out there. And I'm kind of picking apart the commonalities between all of their stories, sharing them with you guys, but I'll also be telling you guys throughout this case, like, oh, this part was alleged by Cobbins, this part was alleged by Davidson, so you guys kind of have an idea of whose point of view we're talking about. Without further ado, let's get into it. So Channon Christian was born on April 29th of 1985. She was born in Nacogdoches, Texas, and her mom is Dina Christian and her dad is Gary Christian. At the time that Channon was born, she had an older brother. His name is Chase, and aside from the normal sibling squabbles, they really did love each other. And to Dina and Gary, both of their children were huge blessings because when they first got together and they first got married, they were told that it was unlikely that they would be able to have children. So to first have Chase and then be blessed a few years later with Channon it was amazing for both of them. And their hearts were just so full of love when both of them were born. And Dina said that Channon was like her little like chunky monkey because she was a bit of a chunkier baby and she absolutely loved it. And I know, like, I feel like even when I see like little squish babies, I'm like, oh, they're the cutest. And Channon was one of those babies. And if you guys are somewhat familiar with this case or you saw my little short form version of this case, then you would know that it's based in Knoxville, Tennessee. And they did relocate there from Texas as a family when Channon was still a young girl. So although her and Chase were born in Texas, they were quickly relocated to Tennessee, and that is where they spent the majority of their childhoods as well as young adult lives. And despite being moved around, Channon was still very social and she made a ton of friends. She was extremely likable and more of an extrovert. She was an extremely trustworthy friend too. Her mom Dina recalled how her friends would often call her asking about like boyfriend issues and things like that. They would confide in Channon and ask her for advice all the time. And another important thing about her is that she really loved people and children in general. When she went to college, I believe she went to the University of Tennessee, she decided to major in sociology because with a sociology degree, you can become a social worker, you can help people. I feel like if you want to go after something like that, 1, you have to have really tough skin, and 2, you have to really love people and want to see the best in them. And Channon also had every single little thing planned even after college, okay? So she wanted a big wedding, she wanted a nice house, she wanted to have 4 kids, and she wanted the first one to be a boy. So that way the rest of her kids could have an amazing older brother, just like the older brother that she had. Now the other person we're going to talk a lot about today is Christopher Newsom. Hugh Christopher Newsom to be exact, but he usually went by Christopher or Chris. Now, Christopher was born in September of 1983, and at the time that he was born, he actually had grown adult siblings. He was a little bit of a surprise, but his parents, Hugh and Mary, were more than excited to have him in their lives. Christopher really excelled in sports from the time that he was a young child all the way up to teenage and young adulthood, especially baseball. And it wasn't only a sport that he loved to play, but he was really skilled in it, so skilled that he could have gone on to play in the MLB. He first picked up a baseball bat at age 4 when him and his parents were living in Halls, Tennessee. And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'm assuming the only other way to pronounce it would be Howells. So I'm just going to say Halls. Please tell me if I'm wrong. But he grew up in Halls, Tennessee. He played baseball all throughout elementary school and all throughout high school. But when he went to Halls High School, that is where he actually sustained an injury while playing baseball. And whereas before he could have gone into it professionally, because of that injury, he no longer could. But instead of letting that injury define the rest of his life and being extremely bummed out that he couldn't really play any longer, he then leaned into another one of his talents, and that was woodwork, like wood whittling and wood artistry. In general, he really just liked to do things with his hands, so whether it was catching a baseball or working on a piece of wood, that was just his thing. Now, it was in late 2006 that their two lives would cross. Around November of 2006, Channon was 21 years old and Christopher was 23, and they had a ton of mutual friends. And these mutual friends saw them both and were like, they would make such a good couple. So they introduced them, and the friends were right because they hit it off right away. Because they tragically wouldn't be together for that long, there's not a lot known about them as a couple, but from what their mutual friends said, they seemed to bring out the best in each other, and Christopher was so enamored by Channon that he brought her home to meet his parents. Now, the couple's parents themselves didn't end up meeting until the events that would unfold, as we will get into shortly, but they both talked about each other to their parents, and Channon did get to meet Christopher's parents, so they were aware of who she was. Now, about 2 months after they started dating, it was January of 2007, and they were both invited to a friend's birthday party, and they were planning on attending this party together, and all of their friends thought that this was a great idea, but they were going to spend that Saturday, January 6th of 2007, apart. Channon was going to go to one of her friends' apartments to get ready with them for the party, and like girl stuff, you turn on the music, you get all your makeup out, you're kind of like talking, you're gossiping, you're doing your hair, getting all like dolled up and cute. That's what she was doing on that day, and Christopher was out playing golf with some of his friends. Now, around 8:00 p.m., Christopher actually dropped off one of his friends at the very same party that him and Channon would be going to later. And the couple had made plans to get dinner together before heading over to the party. And Channon had stayed at her friend's apartment. This was the Washington Ridge apartment in Knoxville, Tennessee. These apartments were very safe, they were very clean, they were on a good side of town, so to speak. And the friend who lived at that apartment ended up leaving and going to the party, so Channon was there by herself for a good period of time waiting for Christopher to arrive. And then when he would arrive, she would go down to the parking lot, and then they would leave together to go to dinner. And when Christopher arrived, they were going to take Shannon's Toyota 4Runner, and it was a white Toyota 4Runner, and they met up in the parking lot, and Channon was in the driver's seat, and Christopher was standing at the driver's side, and he was kissing her, like giving her like a little kiss or something, because they hadn't seen each other all day. And when you're in that like newly in love little like, I guess, honeymoon phase, like you just want to be all over each other, and they were no different. So they were being very sweet, very cute together, except for a group of men decided to approach them. A group of men who did not know who they were, didn't even know their names, and decided to carjack them. Now, here's where we're going to switch perspectives. We're going to switch to the perspective of the people who were carjacking and what they were up to and what led to this course of events. So there was this man named Lamarcus Davidson, and some people say Lamarcus, some people say Lamarcus. Truly, I don't know which one is correct, because even in the court proceedings, different judges pronounce his name differently. So his last name is Davidson. I'm going to refer to him as Davidson for the rest of the video. So he had gone to prison for 5 years, and he had recently gotten out in August of 2006. So by New Year's of 2007, he was out of prison. He was back at his house, which was 2316 Shipment Street. And he had been in prison for carjacking. He had carjacked and robbed someone else, and that is why he had been in prison. And outside of the carjacking and the prison time, he just did not lead a good life at all. He was into drugs, he had several drug dealers, his street wasn't that good of a street to live on. Like, I think one of the people he dealt drugs to lived like right across the street from him. So anyways, because he had been in prison, he had not seen his brother in several years, and his brother lived in Kentucky. His brother's name was Latavis Cobbins, and he was in his early 20s, and he had a girlfriend who was 18 years old named Vanessa Coleman, and then he had another friend named George Thomas. And so for New Year's, the three of them were going to drive down to Tennessee and go and visit Davidson, his brother, and like spend some quality family time together. And a lot of what I'm going to say next is from Cobbin's perspective. I personally think he was the most open about the series of events that took place. So according to him, things were going really well, like the first couple of days, except for his brother Davidson and his friend George Thomas had kind of like gotten into a bit of a fight, and Davidson didn't really like George Thomas at all and would threaten him, pushed him against the wall. I don't know what the dispute was about exactly, but that's what he said happened. And him and Vanessa, Cobbins and Vanessa Coleman had a room in the back of the house, like just to themselves. And on January 6th of 2007, Cobbin said that him and Vanessa were in the back room and that they were having sex, and Davidson like called out to his brother, knocked on the door, and was like, "Hey, I need you to come with me." So Cobbins and Vanessa stop, and Cobbins comes out and is like, what's up? Like, where do you want me to go? And Davidson told him that there was this like really cool chick who he got drugs from, and he wanted his brother Cobbins to go and meet this chick. He was like, she's a hustler, this, that, and the other. She's like really attractive, things like that. And Davidson told Cobbins to tell Vanessa that they were just going to go to the store. And at this point, like, I guess Cobbins agrees and tells Vanessa that they're going to go to the store, but they're really going to go pick up drugs, or at least that is what Davidson said they were doing. And outside of Davidson and Cobbins, there was another man who was over who was a friend of Davidson's. I'm hoping that the pictures on the screen really help because there are a lot of characters at play in this case. So the other person who was friends with Davidson was Eric Boyd. So they went and got in Eric Boyd's car, and Cobbins said that Eric Boyd had kind of like parked down the street from the house. So they got into his car. It sounds like Cobbins was in the back seat, and then Davidson and Eric were in the front seat, like the passenger and drivers. And then the three men drove into the Washington Ridge apartments, and according to Cobbins, they circled around this apartment complex in the parking lot twice. And Cobbins, to his brother, was like, "What are we doing? Why are we circling around? Like, where is she?" Davidson and Eric say, "Oh, we just forgot where her apartment was. Like, we're just trying to figure out which one it is." And eventually they stop driving and they pull into a parking spot. But they do not turn the car off. That is something that Cobbins said that he noticed. And apparently his brother said, like, gestured up to an upstairs apartment and was like, "That one's hers." But then, without saying anything, Davidson and Eric Boyd jumped out of the car and ran over to this Toyota 4Runner. And Cobbins, from where he was sitting, allegedly, obviously, like, there was no security cameras, so we don't know if, like, Cobbins is telling the truth here. If he got out of the car as well, we really do not know. But according to him, his brother and Eric Boyd ran over to that Toyota 4Runner, and he could see a woman in the driver's seat and a man standing near her, and he could see that they were either hugging or kissing. And he also saw that his brother and Eric Boyd pulled a gun on this couple and began to carjack them. And apparently they were telling Christopher and Channon that they needed this car for a drug deal and forced them into the back seats of their own car. And then Eric Boyd and Davidson got into the front seat of their Toyota 4Runner and started driving it. And Cobbins was apparently freaking out and was like, "Where are you guys going? I just want to go back to the house." And Davidson was like, "Chill out, brother. Like, we're going to go back to my house." Cobbins then gets in the front seat of Eric Boyd's car, the car that they had driven there, and followed his brother and Eric Boyd, who were driving the Toyota 4Runner, back to Davidson's house on Chipman Street. And according to Cobbins, they parked the Toyota 4Runner right in front of the house. By the time that they got out with the man and the woman, because they didn't know their names, they didn't ask, like, they had no idea who Christopher and Channon were. The woman, Cobbins said, was blindfolded and was wearing Davidson's hoodie, and he'd kind of like concealed her face. And he'd bound her at the wrists with something. And at this point, Cobbins was kind of starting to trip out a bit because earlier that night, like on their way over to the apartment complex, Davidson had given his brother a wet blunt, which is like a blunt of weed that's like laced. And it does sometimes take a bit for those drugs to set in. So they set in a little later when they got back to the house. And at this point, they had not only committed carjacking and robbery, but they'd also just kidnapped people. So Cobbins is freaking out, and he's like looking at his brother like, what are you doing? And repeatedly asks him, what are you doing?
Man, y'all tripping, man. What is y'all doing? Y'all tripping. He like, man, whatever.
And Davidson was reportedly just like, chill out, it's fine. Like, he seemed really casual about it. And so he took Channon and Christopher into the living room, and he had Channon sit against the wall.
My brother walks in with the girl. He got her by her arm, and he's put his hoodie over her, and the hood is over her head. Her eyes are blindfolded with a bandana. And he comes in, every boy comes in behind him, holding the guy. The girl is got a bandana around her eyes and her hands bound in front of her. He comes in with the guy, holding his arm. I noticed the guy has a bandana around his eyes, and his hands are tied behind him.
And I think he kind of separated the two so they couldn't see each other, because repeatedly Channon at one point had asked, where's my boyfriend? Where's my boyfriend? And the other thing to keep in mind here is that when those three men came back to the house with Channon and Christopher, Vanessa Coleman and George Thomas were still there. So there were two people at the house when the five of them arrived back to the house. And Cobbins knew that what they had just done was a crime, and he did not want to be a part of it. And he told his brother that, and his brother was like, if the police get involved, I'll take the fall for everything. Little note to self, he did not take the fall for everything, and he wasn't solely responsible for everything that was about to happen. Cobbins told George Thomas and Vanessa to start packing up their things.
This is not the place to be right now. We got to get up out of here. What Vanessa at? Man, she back there asleep. I said, man, all right, we got to get up out of here. He like, man, what happened? I said, man, it don't even matter what happened. We got to get up out of here.
And Vanessa, who was 18 years old, was like, what's going on? Like, why? And Cobbins was just like, just pack. But Davidson reportedly would not let the three of them leave.
My brother comes out in the living room. What y'all back there doing? Y'all too quiet. You know, I get paranoid when it get too quiet. What's going on? I said, man, we be asking you what's going on. You the one tripping. You the one carjack these people. Nah, man, I told you I got this, man. Why you still tripping, man? I said, man, you tripping, man. You got all us involved in this, man. You tripping. Man, look, man. I said, you know what? We finna go. We ain't got nothing to do with this. We finna go. You do what you do. We ain't gonna tell on you, man. You gonna end up getting caught yourself. So we finna go. Nah, ain't nobody going nowhere. What you mean ain't nobody going nowhere? We finna go, dude. You ain't talking about nothing. We finna go. Nah. He pulled his gun out of his pocket. He didn't point it at nobody, but he just pulls it out. I'm like, dang, bro, you gonna kill me now? You pulling your gun on me? You gonna kill me now? I'm your bro. You gonna kill me? Nah, I ain't gonna kill you. But I'll shoot your ass, but I ain't gonna kill you. George, you know I don't like you anyway. I'll shoot you. And Vanessa, don't make me shoot your little pretty butt. So I'm like, man.
So they stayed, and Cobbins went back to the bedroom with Vanessa and shut the door for a bit. So it's not really exactly known during that time period what happened to Channon and Christopher, but we do know that both of them were beaten severely. And then Cobbins overhears his brother Davidson yelling at George Thomas, and he was like, come here, G, because he referred to him as G. And Davidson essentially told him, like, look, I don't trust you. You need to earn my trust. You need to do something right now to earn my trust. And G agrees, because I think this is my assumption, very heat of the moment, scared. They're all kind of on some sort of drug. And G just, was kind of scared of Davidson because Davidson had previously pushed him up against a wall and could overpower him physically. But nonetheless, what George Thomas did is disgusting and beyond messed up. So to earn his trust, George gets into the car with Davidson and Eric Boyd. And the other person that they get into the car with, or more like forced into the car with them, is Christopher. And at this point, Aside from beating Christopher, some of the men had also sexually assaulted him. He had been assaulted. He didn't know where his girlfriend was or what was going to happen to him or her. I can just, I'm shaking right now. The fear that I can't even I know I can't comprehend near the amount of fear that they must have been feeling in that moment. But he must have been terrified, especially now leaving the house again, but without his girlfriend, not knowing what more would happen to either of them. So Davidson, Eric Boyd, and George Thomas got into the Toyota 4Runner with Christopher, and they drove him out to some very sketchy railroad tracks near 9th Avenue, which is not a good place in Knoxville, Tennessee, kind of a more rundown part of town where crime is more common. And they take Christopher out to these railroad tracks, and they pull out a gun and they take turns shooting him. But it is thought that Eric Boyd delivered the fatal shot, and it was him who then went over and grabbed a can of gasoline, and they attempted to set Christopher's body on fire. And after they were done, the three men then took the Toyota 4Runner and they drove it a few miles away from where Christopher's body was, and they abandoned it. And allegedly, during this time that the three men were gone, it was just Cobbins, his girlfriend Vanessa Coleman, and Channon at the house. And if you're thinking what I thought when I got to this part of the case, that if Cobbins was a good person and that if Vanessa was a good person, they would let Channon go. They would just untie her, open the door, and then lie to Davidson and say, sorry, she got away. Or if they were afraid of him, then just leave themselves because they had their own vehicle. They could have totally left. They could have even left on foot. Go and report him to the police. Let your brother get arrested again. But no, they did not do that. I wish that they did that. Not that that would have been the best case scenario, because the best case scenario would have been leaving Christopher and Channon alone in the first place, but they didn't do that. They were apparently just in their bedroom, and at this point, before they left, Davidson had moved Channon from the living room to his bedroom, and he had kept her wrists bound and kind of had the blindfold down at this point, but she was attached to a gym bag that was full of different weights and different books and things, so she could not move. And Vanessa allegedly got up and went to the bathroom, and Cobbins went and checked on Channon, and she asked for a cup of water. He brought her a cup of water. He then went back to the kitchen and he put it back in the sink. And when he then went back to go talk to her again, she said that she was really scared and that she would do anything if he just let her go. She was begging him to convince his brother to let her go because she was really confused, and understandably so, why Cobbins wasn't letting her go, because she was not kidnapped by him. From what she knew, she was just taken by Eric Boyd and Davidson. So Cobbins then tells her that him and Vanessa are trapped there too, just like her, even though they weren't bound or anything. They weren't assaulted, they weren't beaten, but they were trapped just like she was, and that they couldn't do anything to help her. But despite this, what Cobbins does next is atrocious, especially because he did not have the intention of letting her go. She was so scared, she was so desperate. She just wanted to know where her boyfriend was. She wanted to go back to her family. I'm sure in that moment, because of what she allegedly said, that she would have given up anything to just be able to leave that night and be alive. And she was so desperate for her life that she offered, allegedly, to give him oral sex. And Vanessa, his girlfriend, is in the bathroom, and Cobbins decides that that's a great idea and pulls down his pants.
She started asking me, would I convince him to let her go? I said, I'll try. She said, just please, just please. She said, please, can you just convince him to let me go? I said, I'll try. And she said, I'll do anything, just please, just let me go. And she even offered oral sex. So, and I had her give me oral sex. She gave me oral sex.
And personally, I'm going to categorize this as sexual assault because she should not have been put in a position in the first place to feel that she would need to offer that. So he finishes just as his girlfriend Vanessa is flushing the toilet. He pulls up his pants and he does not let her go. Now, when Davidson, George Thomas, and Eric Boyd returned to the house, the torture of Channon continued. Channon was gang raped by all of them, Cobbins included, and potentially also by Vanessa Coleman. Vanessa has always claimed that she was just a bystander and that she was a victim too, and that she was paralyzed by fear, and that all of the phones in the house had their batteries taken out, which is why she didn't call for help. But her DNA was on the bindings that Channon had. She was present for all of the horrible things that even her own boyfriend did to Channon Christian. A medical examiner would later conclude that she had been raped orally, anally, and vaginally, and potentially with another object aside from a human body part. The medical examiner thought that they had at one point violated her with a chair leg, and that abuse lasted for hours. They kept her alive for an extremely long time, but it was an agonizing last few hours of life. And when they decided that they were done with her, they disregarded her like trash. They poured bleach all over her body, and they also poured it down her throat in hopes to erase the DNA evidence of the atrocious things that they had done to her that night. Then they forced her to crawl into trash bags as well as other plastic wrappings, and they then put her in the trash can of the kitchen. And it would be in that trash can that she would suffocate to death, which suffocation takes a significant amount of time, and I don't even want to begin to imagine the thoughts that she must have been having. That night, her mom was so worried about her because she was very close with her mom and would always text her and would always call her, and her not responding to her mom's messages was very unusual. And then the next morning, she didn't clock into work, and that was also strange. So Shannon's mom contacted Christopher's parents and asked them if they knew where the couple were, and they said that they didn't, and that Christopher was supposed to be staying the night with a friend the night after that party. So they weren't exactly expecting him home yet. But then when neither set of parents could get in contact with their children, and then they contacted their children's friends who were at that party, and those friends confirmed that they never arrived to the party, that is when they knew that something was terribly wrong. And Shannon's mom filed a missing persons report immediately. They also began tracking her daughter's phone and got in contact with the cell phone company to see where it last pinged. And either the very next day or the day after that, January 7th or January 8th of 2007, that is when they discovered Shannon's car abandoned. And the night after Christopher's murder was when his body was discovered. So he was actually discovered the very next day on Sunday, January 7th of 2007 by a railroad conductor who saw a charred body on the side of the tracks when he went into work. His body was not only charred, but it was riddled with bullet holes, and authorities quickly needed to find Channon because they knew that they were together. So if Christopher was here and if Christopher was murdered, Channon was either in extreme danger at that current moment or she was potentially already gone. So they did not hesitate to forensically test Shannon's car, and they did find one fingerprint on an envelope, and that fingerprint belonged to an ex-con who had recently gotten out of prison. That fingerprint was Davidson's. And here's an extremely messed up thing that happened when they went to go obtain the search warrant. They got the signature to go and do the search warrant at his house on Chipman Street, but somehow when they filed it, that signature got cropped off at the bottom. So it was originally a valid search warrant, but by the time that they submitted it, it wasn't valid. So, but at that point, they'd already submitted it and they didn't know that it wasn't valid, technically. So they went over to the house on Chipman Street and no one was home. No one. They went in through the front door and they almost immediately found a human body in the trash can of the kitchen. And they were pretty sure that it was Channon, but they couldn't get her positively ID'd for a few days. And the difficult part about this is that the search warrant was quickly proven to be not valid. But they also couldn't take back the fact that they found a deceased body in the kitchen of that home. And it's that little legal technicality that for years Davidson has tried to be my own rights were violated. And it kind of altogether caused this huge hiccup in the investigation. But nonetheless, Davidson was tracked down. He was in Knoxville, Tennessee still, but just not at his own home. And George Thomas, Vanessa Coleman, and Cobbins were all found in Kentucky. They had gone back to Kentucky. Eric Boyd, I'm not sure where he went, but he actually wouldn't be convicted until 2018 or 2019. So it would take years for him, the one who was solely responsible for Christopher's murder, to even get a sentence. Around 1 year after the murders took place, on October 11th of 2008, the house on Shipman Street was demolished, and their parents were there to see it demolished, as I'm sure you guys are seeing right now in the pictures. The place that Channon and Christopher were tortured and murdered no longer exists. To this day, if you look it up on Google Maps, it is a vacant lot. And in 2009 was when Davidson received the death penalty from the jury and the judge. It was very clear that he was the ringleader in this, and he was convicted on all counts, from carjacking to kidnapping to armed robbery to first-degree felony murder for both Channon and Christopher, to sexual assault for both of them. Every single charge that he could have possibly been convicted of, he was. And you can hear, as I'm about to play for you, the audible gasp when he was given the death penalty. And before we play it, he is not yet dead.
With regard to the count charging Mr. Davidson with the first-degree felony murder of Hugh Christopher Newsom, that is counts 1, 2, 5, 6, 10, 13, and 14. What is the decision of the jury as to what the punishment should be with regard to those counts?
The punishment is death.
Cobbins, Davidson's brother, as well as George Thomas, they were both given life sentences. And the difference between Cobbins and George is that George was also convicted of first-degree felony murder for Christopher, whereas Cobbins wasn't, because he was at Shipman Street during that murder. But both of them were found guilty of Shannon's murder. They were both found guilty of sexual assault. Cobbins was also found guilty of kidnapping, and so was Vanessa. Vanessa was given a 35-year sentence. She did try to play the victim. She was eligible for parole in 2017, but that was denied, thankfully. Both sets of parents were advocating for her to not get parole, because they found one of her journals, and her journal said that she had a great time in Tennessee and that it was like one hell of an adventure, which I wouldn't describe armed kidnapping, murder, and sexual assault as a hell of an adventure. And she's also smirking. I'll show you guys what she was doing, but as soon as she was sentenced, she looked smug. I don't know why she was making that facial expression. I feel like if I was convicted of anything, I'd be crying. I don't know. The look on her face alone just gives me the chills. And Eric Boyd was not convicted of anything, like I said, until 2018 or 2019, when George Thomas agreed to testify against him. And when he did, that is when Eric was convicted of both Channon and Christopher's murders, as well as the sexual assaults, the armed robberies, the arson, because they did set Christopher's body on fire.
4, the first offense charged, first-degree felony murder of Channon Christian during the perpetration of robbery of Channon Christian. Did the jury reach a verdict?
Yes, we did.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
In count 5, the first offense charged, first-degree felony murder of Hugh Christopher Newsom during the perpetration of kidnapping of Hugh Christopher Newsom. Did the jury reach a verdict?
Yes, we did.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
In count 6, the first offense charged, first-degree felony murder of Hugh Christopher Newsom during the perpetration of kidnapping of Channon Christian. Did the jury reach a verdict?
Yes, we did.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
In count 7, the first offense charged, first-degree felony murder of Channon Christian during the perpetration of kidnapping of Hugh Christopher Newsom. Did the jury reach a verdict?
Yes, we did.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
In count 8, the first offense charged, first-degree felony murder of Channon Christian during the perpetration of kidnapping of Channon Christian. Did the jury reach a verdict?
Yes, we did.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
In count 9, the first offense charged, first-degree felony murder of Hugh Christopher Newsom during the perpetration of rape of Hugh Christopher Newsom. Did the jury reach a verdict?
Yes.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
Not to say thankfully, but kind of thankfully, he already had a 90-year prison sentence for other unrelated crimes. So he was handed 2 life sentences on top of the 90 years for other unrelated crimes. In other words, he will most likely die in prison, and it doesn't seem like there's any way he will be eligible for parole because he was not given any possibility of parole. As for both families, it absolutely breaks my heart that they spent so long trying to get justice for their children. The fact that their children were taken from them in 2007 and still as recent as 2020, trials were still going on related to their kids' cases. Because Davidson has tried to overturn his death penalty repeatedly and has tried to say that he has no guilt whatsoever. It's an unfathomable thing what those 5 individuals did and carried out that night against 2 absolutely innocent, loving people who would have lived fantastic lives. But I would imagine that it would make it worse to then deny the guilt and not take ownership. There is no way that Davidson, Cobbins, George, or Eric are getting out of prison. Vanessa's the only one who will probably end up getting out. But to know that that is your fate and still not confess to the truth and still not bring some closure to their families it's beyond fucked up. Like, I'm sorry, I couldn't think of a better thing to say besides fucked up, but that's the thing that it keeps screaming in my mind as to how to describe it. Both sets of parents have said that they have not touched their children's bedrooms. And Christopher's parents said that they still visit his every single day and that they'll just come in, they'll touch his comforter, some of his favorite shirts, but they can't make themselves take things out of it and turn it into something else or move. So that is it, you guys. I appreciate you for staying till the end of the video if you made it this far. I'm tearing up. This case I've been wanting to record this video for a while, but I haven't been able to without crying. So if I didn't cry for the majority of that video, and you can understand it and hear it and hopefully honor their memories, give them a moment of silence, say a prayer for their family, keep their families in your thoughts, then I would say that this video did exactly what I wanted it to. And I will see you guys for the next one. Thank you for listening. Bye.